doing that. Basically, what we've seen and talked about already in terms of the electrical plan is exactly how to do it and kind of what is shown, but we probably didn't cover all of it because I know we definitely haven't put in like an electrical panel box or anything like that yet. But an electrical plan shows the location and type of electrical equipment used. It's a plan view section. If you were doing this manually, you would take the base floor plan and trace it, usually through some sort of a transparency paper. It shows distribution panels, outlets, switches, and special features. So that's something we also didn't talk about, but would normally add in as well. So these days, well, actually, maybe not so much anymore, but therefore, in the aughts and tens, most houses that were being built new were built not with phone jacks in the wall, but with Ethernet jacks in the wall, so that you would be able to plug your computers in each room of the house, and there'd be a special panel box where everything would get switched, and that would be basically how you would get internet connectivity through a house. Now you can still request that to be added to a house when you're building it, especially if you're I believe the colloquial term is nerd, like me. Like I would definitely have that added to any house that I was having built because even though most all of your devices these days come with Wi-Fi built in to them, sometimes that's just not an option due to. She also stated that adjustments. Okay, whatever. Um, So that would be a special type of outlet symbol that you would show on an electrical plan. Same goes with phone jacks or cable terminals in the wall. For example, in my tiny house that I designed here, one thing that I really, really wouldn't want for this TV that I have hanging, midway up the wall inside of the great room would be I wouldn't want to have the cable scene running down the wall. So, what I would do in that situation is I would have probably a power outlet behind the TV, which I did, but I would also probably include an Ethernet port because most TVs these days are smart TVs. I would also have probably an HDMI outlet up there as well, so I can plug the TV and everything into this box behind the TV and then have all of the wires hidden as they come down to the wall. And actually, in a setup like this, I probably wouldn't even keep my entertainment equipment under that TV. It would probably end up restricting the walk space from the door. So, probably, and this is not a decision I'd really thought about before right now, but I would probably build in like my entertainment storage for game consoles, media computers, Blu-ray players, if you still have something like that, into a built-in underneath the stairs, and then have all of those cable terminals from up here end down here. That way, it's in a convenient place. With the way that things are set up these days, and how thin TVs are, and how just where the technology has come from or coming to nowadays, a lot of times you don't have to have everything in the same location. Heck, there's even a couple of the tech enthusiasts that I follow have basically a closet in the basement where their entire house's um, entertainment equipment is stored, and then everything else runs to various parts of the house through cable terminals. And that would be one of the best things I think about, excuse me, building a house right now would be to build it for the spec of the type of um, life in which you live. If you're a hardcore gamer, then have that built into the table in front of you and connected to your TV or whatever. Instead of having the console set in front of the TV itself, you could potentially, if you have an older, or if you're one of those people who are completely flipped out about lag and latency, wired cables running to the box that can be tripped over. So it's all things that you kind of have to think about, but they don't have to be the first thing that you think about when you're designing the house itself. But it's definitely something you have to think about as you move forward. This is way off the topic for electrical planning, though. I kind of got, as usual, far afield. But anyway, go back to here. Um, It'll also identify the number and type of circuits that are in place as well. So one thing that we didn't do is we would, in a house like this, we would add an electrical box, a panel, a few. So in the past and in some older houses, you'll still find fuse boxes. Fuses are weird things. You can find them in a whole bunch of different uh, a whole bunch of different shapes and sizes. The most common one for residential, I literally looks like the bottom of a light bulb with a kind of a button switch on the top of it. You screw the fuse in place, and then it prevents overload um, from continuing to uh, from continuing to pass current through the system in the event of a short circuit. Now, there's a lot more. We were talking about ground fault circuit interrupters. That's locally at the plug. So if something happens, you have a much shorter run, and you'll get a much smaller jolt um, before those cause problems. But at the house level, at the fuse box, um, you would end up having, there's a much greater chance of it not activating right, because a much smaller jolt will cause a GFCI to engage. It takes a lot more to pop a fuse. There were also very dangerous ways to get around fuses popping. So, as fuse boxes became less common, fuses became more expensive, and there was a trend of basically you put a penny on the end of a blown fuse and you screw it into the socket. The penny will continually allow electricity to pass and completely bypass the fuse itself. But if you have a blown fuse, until that fuse gets replaced, your whole house would be down. Luckily, that's an old technology. So, more often than not, older fuse boxes have been replaced by these, and all new construction is required to have these. So, instead of it being a fuse, you have a breaker box. Instead of having a fuse that has physically something inside of it, like a tungsten filament in a light bulb, that breaks when it detects a circuit overload, basically now you just have a switch that pops. And as soon as you fix the problem, you push the switch back over and you have power again. Now, these can wear out, but when that happens, not only is it much more infrequent that something like that would happen, but it's also very easy to replace. You turn off the main switch, you remove a couple of screws, and the whole breaker pops out. And then you replace it with another one. Uh, those of you who have been in my woodshop class know that we pop breakers in there a couple of times a semester, and I just have to go in and reset it, and we're good to go most of the time. Um, but essentially, that's one of the main things we haven't added yet. And what we would do to make that work is that it's usually the last thing you do on an electrical plan too, because you go through and you use that switch. What did they call it? The connect electrical option. And if it was in the kitchen, I would come through and I would connect all of the outlets together. Um, there we go. So all of those together, and instead of connecting them to a switch, because we wouldn't want a switch that turns off the kitchen, we'd connect them to our out or electrical panel. So BREAKER box. UX. Whoops. So DC breaker box. This one's an outdoor one. Um, let's see if I just type in breaker if that'll come up with what I want. Electrical. That's a legend, a meter. Where would they be at? Here, let's just browse for it. That's probably going to be easier to find because I don't exactly know what the program calls it. Mechanical, electrical, plumbing, electrical, switches, special symbol, outlets, jacks, fans, exhaust, detectors, and alarms. Um, different switch options, special symbols. Ah, electrical panel. There it is. Okay, so I'm just going to click on that, and I think in this particular place I'd put it on the wall next to the washer and dryer, just because that's essentially becoming my utility room over here underneath the stairs. So then I would take my electrical switch and I would connect that to the panel. Same with the so I would go to the electrical outlets in the bathroom. For those though, I would also include the light switch because you want the bathroom all on one setup. Um, Maybe I would go ahead and do the kitchen light switches on that as well. Oops, Control Z. I don't want to do that. Let's see. We'll just connect that to the panel as well. And the same for the living room and the same for the upstairs, except the upstairs we wouldn't actually connect it to the panel because of that same issue that we had last time getting the lights upstairs connected to the switches downstairs. But that's basically the next step that we would have to do that we didn't add before. Let's see here. Service entrance capacity required. So, okay. This is more information that you would need in order to completely and accurately finish the electrical plan according to code. So, what is the service entry capacity? And that doesn't mean the service entry to your house. That means how much electricity can be delivered to your house from the pole. A couple years ago, some of you might remember this, we had a whole lot of rain, and one day during school, all of the lights and everything started doing that a really weird flickering thing. The hallway lights were blinking on and off. Half of the classrooms worked, but some of them didn't. Um, what had happened was the pole that is the main electrical input for the high school campus had slipped. Like it had sunk into the ground a little bit because of all of the rain. And when that happened, um, part of the electrical box connection from the outside grid was severed. So the school has three different phases of power that comes in from outside of the district. Um, so they're essentially, in order to keep the current steady and flowing for such a large institution that brings in so much power every day and every second, it gets distributed across three different circuits. What had happened is one of those circuits got severed, and the other one was close to being severed, so it was kind of intermittently contacting. That's what caused all of the weird power problems in the building. A residential structure isn't going to have that. It's going to have just the one. But and usually you're not going to have nearly as much power coming into it as a building like this would. But you still need to know how much power that is. Typically, typically it's something like you know what? I can't even. My information's way out of date there. So go. Let's see here. Hopefully, it's give me a. Okay, so about 240 volts is what comes into a standard residential house. Service means about between about 100 and 200 amps, which, if you know anything about how electricity works and what happens when it comes into contact with you, it's not the volts that kill you, it's the amps. And it doesn't take a lot of amps before you are not going to be here anymore. Um, let's see, we can close that. But basically that, and you can use your basic math or physics calculation there to figure out how many watts that is. I'm not going to do that right now. But essentially, that's it. So you have between 100 and 200 amps and about 240 volts of power being sent into a standard electrical house. Excuse me. You have to know where the meter and distribution panel of the house is located. You as the designer have input into where the electrical panel in the house actually goes. What you don't have is any say in where the meter is placed. That's usually the closest corner or side of the house to the input pole that the electricity is coming in from. You need to know where the switches are going to go and what types, the location and the type of lighting fixtures, special equipment, and the number and the types of circuits that are being used. Um, Finally, you have to know the electrical schedule or fixture schedule, what the symbols look like, which is not as big a deal when you're designing because it does that part for you for the most part. But if you were the one reading those blueprints, you have to know what they mean without, always needing to go to your common electrical symbols table, like these. There we go. All right, and then this talks about, a bunch of different things about what the plans look like, how to put them in. So this is showing you essentially what we've talked about and what you can actively see on my plan right here. That one's mainly for lights and switches more than the electrical houses themselves. So everything is just connecting the lights to switches. This is slightly out of date. The current code says 6 feet along the walls, not 8 inch or not 8 feet. Let's see here. Anything else in here? This goes on to talk about energy efficient alternatives. In fact, honestly, I don't think at this point you can even go and buy tungsten light bulbs at Walmart or someplace like that. You know, the ones that just have the coil that glows like an old Edison bulb. I think everything has to be CFL or EL or one of these alphabet soup of light types. Um, let's see here. So these are kind of cool. Compact fluorescent bulbs are those curly cubed ones. LEDs are light emitting diodes. They're essentially just the little bulbs that glow certain colors depending on what the settings are. I'm sure you've all seen those at some place or another. But something that you might not have seen before is called an electrostimulated luminescence. It's kind of like neon, but I guess neon is a form of EL, but this is much safer, it's flexible, it's cheaper, doesn't require it to be in glass tubes, and it doesn't get hot. Neon, if you've ever come close to a neon light, is incredibly hot. Um, but they're really cool. A lot of people use them for accent lights, kind of like those LED strips that I put in the kitchen on my house. They take very, very little energy. They're kind of cool to play with too. If you ever get bored and want to go Micro Center, which is a place at 95th and Metcalf, sells like 10-foot strands of them for about $10, and you can play with them with just a couple of AA batteries. But here are an incandescent bulb. I was talking about the one with the filament that you can't really find anymore. the CFL bulb, and then the LED bulbs. Here's a little bit of recessed lighting. I really like things like this. I would definitely put something like that in a house that I design for myself, so that you can get the light, but you don't actually see the bulb itself. And that's one thing that is really, as a designer or as somebody who just has decorated their own house, one thing I never want to see are the light bulbs themselves. I want to see the light from them, but it's much softer when it's being diffused through like a lampshade. Or in this case, it's being shined up at the ceiling from a ledge, but you don't have to see the harshness of the bulbs themselves. Now, that's not always possible, and it's usually accent lighting that you care about stuff like that. Because, I mean, obviously, if you looked up in my classroom right now, I can see the bulbs. They've been diffused through the fluorescent, the lighting cage, but that's not really a big problem. Same with like a light fixture in a fan that has four bulbs that you can see. It's not a big deal either. It just come when it comes to accent lights, things that are supposed to provide light but not harsh light. The other thing to run over that does have to be included is the exterior lighting. So sometimes that is a full separate plan, because generally exterior lighting is going to be taken care of by a different contractor than the person who does the interior light. Exterior lighting is usually taken care of by whoever the landscape company is, or the people who are actually putting the outside aesthetics of your house that is being built together. And they'll bring in their own contractors to put exterior lights. Um, that being said, other than the ones that are actually attached to the house itself, that's still usually the responsibility of the internal contractor. But if you have light posts or string lights out in the yard itself, spotlights pointing at a flagpole, something like that, those would be more likely than not to be the exterior contractor's job. So one thing we haven't talked about a whole lot in any of this are what are our like schedules. This is an example of a light fixture schedule. And all that really is it says here are the different types of lights, who built them, what that company's catalog number is, and how many that you need, where it's going to be mounted, and how many watts should the bulb that you're putting in be, uh, at least initially. Here, and then you have some remarks. So this, let's see, number C is a mold cast, and it should be a twin floodlight. So most likely this is probably a motion protection light, something that's over a garage or over an entrance that turns on when it sees people moving. Here you have this Emerson 220, which is a ceiling fan and light combination. And this basically tells, first off, when they go to buy the stuff for your house, it's all in one place. They don't have to look in a bunch of different areas in order to make the purchases. And a lot of times you'll also have a category on here that talks about the price. Oh, yep. Here's what I was talking about earlier. In the United States, incandescent bulbs of 40 to 100 watts were phased out in 2012. Some bulbs are exempt, such as appliance lamps. You're not going to find a CFL or an LED or an EL light in your oven. It's just there's too much plastic in those to make them work inside of something that has that variable temperature. Same with like inside of your dryer and refrigerator. But those are all bulbs that are specialty, and you won't find them sitting in the main section of bulbs on the shelf at, say, like Walmart. To keep up to date with new technologies and incorporating into the designs whenever possible. Again, that's just something that's a part of green architecture. And then here were the other things I was talking about, the other devices, symbols that would be included on the electrical plan. You don't see many intercom systems anymore, at least not built in ones. They still do exist, but these days, all you have to do is if you have more than one of She Who Must Not Be Named, the Amazon Echo is what I'm getting at. If I say her other name, she will activate and start talking to me. If you have more than one of those in a house, they'll work as an intercom between each other inside of the house if that's something that you wanted. Home security devices, so cameras, motion sensors, things like those would be included, especially if they're meant to be built in. Antenna, cable, satellite jacks, door chimes, and outlets, things like that. Excuse me. So as you can see here, these are why plans are a little bit different. They end up getting pretty complicated the more parts that get put on. Here, that talks more about manual drafting, which we won't really do. If the CAD plan is to be a separate file, so also something we don't really have to worry about with the way that Chief Architect is set up. This is if we were designing in something like AutoCAD, which honestly is how I originally learned how to do architecture. Just be glad I don't make you guys do that. It like it's not as bad as manual drafting, but you still have to make many different layers or different files, and if you make a change in one of them, you have to go through and change that in all of them. Chief Architect, since it's all one unified program, you make a change in one, and it's going to change it on the electrical layer, the plumbing layer, the attic layer, the framing layer. All of these different separate plans. A change that gets made on the base floor plan changes on all of them. So it's a major help. And then this talks about parametric modeling, which is what we are doing specifically. Parametric is basically when you draw a wall, that wall has a 3D shape already created. It has information in it that says that there is drywall and insulation and studs and contact board and siding or whatever the wall is being composed of. That's something that happens just as default part of parametric modeling. So, um, that was a really long winded way of saying what I want you guys to do for today, and you'll have the next 10 minutes or so, or however long you want to work on it. But before the next time we meet, I want you guys to have finished putting your electrical outlets in. You were supposed to have started thinking about what kind of lights and fixtures you wanted to add to the house that you're working on. So go ahead and get those added in, and then start placing things like telephone jacks or and those are under the jack setting here. So if you want to put cable in, make sure you put your cable jacks in. Networking. So I would say if you aren't familiar with what these are, Cat 5 through 7 are different types of internet connecting carrying lines. I would just say use Cat 6, but anyway, either any of those would be fine for a network connection setting. And then figure out one place in the house where your electrical box needs to go. Generally, it's a place that you can hide because they are pretty ugly with very few ways to make them look good. Although there are some people that will just hang a picture over the box cover if it's like in a living room or something, depending on the size of the box. But generally, you want it in some place that's out of the way. All right? A TV jack in this case is going to be something like an HDMI connection. All right, well, you have 10 minutes or the next 10 minutes to work on that. And then after that, you can whatever, but just have all of those symbols in before next class because when we meet again on Tuesday, I will want to see what you have got done. Okay? But again, there's nothing to turn in yet, so just make sure you get it done on your files. Other than that, you guys have a good afternoon. Enjoy your weekend, and be looking for an email from the school probably at the end of today with some information about what your coming weeks here are going to look like and some changes that are coming. So, other than that, guys, have a good one, and we will see you next week.